I'm going to tell you about the night I discovered werewolves are real, and I'm the only one from my squad who's still sane enough to talk about it. What hunted us in the Bitterroot Mountains wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. And it let me live for one reason only, so I could tell you this story and make sure you never ever go there. I need to tell you something I've kept buried for 3 years now, something that wakes me up drenched in sweat with my heart trying to break through my ribs. They tell me it's PTSD, survivor's guilt, my brain filling gaps with impossible things. But I know exactly what I saw in those mountains, what hunted us through that God-forsaken wilderness between Idaho and Montana, and no amount of therapy or official reports will convince me that what killed my entire squad was anything other than what it actually was. The call came at 0247 hours on a Tuesday in late September. I'd been out of active duty for 6 months, doing contract security work and pretending civilian life made sense after 12 years in special operations. The voice was metallic, processed through a scrambler. Sergeant Reynolds, you're being reactivated for classified contract work. Authorization verbal. Deployment immediate. Do you accept? You don't say no to that kind of call. Not when you've signed the papers I signed. I accept, I said, reaching for my go bag. Helicopter lands at your location in 45 minutes. No markings. Bring standard field gear. No electronics. This conversation is already being erased. The line went dead. The helicopter arrived exactly on time. Black Hawk completely unmarked. 4 other men were already strapped in, faces I recognized from dark operations. Miller, who'd pulled me out of Syria. Davidson, who could track. Chen, our communications specialist. Kowalski, 240 pounds of combat engineer. Nobody spoke during the 3-hour flight northwest. That's how you know it's bad. When men who've faced everything sit in complete silence because everyone can feel something about this mission is fundamentally wrong. When we descended toward a clearing so remote I couldn't see roads in any direction, the briefing came through headsets. Gentlemen, you're here to capture a target we're designating the Alpha. This is a capture mission, not elimination. The target is a predator of unprecedented size, extremely rare and highly aggressive. It's dangerous, territorial, and extremely intelligent for its type. Establish perimeter, track to its den, deploy tranquilizer systems. 72 hours. Questions? Miller raised his hand. What species? A pause too long. Large predator. Exact classification, need to know above your clearance. What you need to know is it's dangerous and extremely intelligent. Follow protocols, maintain spacing, do not engage directly. The helicopter touched down. We grabbed gear and stepped into air that felt wrong. Too still, too heavy. As the helicopter disappeared, I looked at my squad. Chen was deliberately not thinking about the briefing. Davidson examined the ground. Miller stared into the tree line with an expression I didn't like. Anyone else think that was the worst briefing they've ever heard? Kowalski said quietly. Nobody laughed, because he was absolutely right. The first thing that hit me was the complete absence of sound. A forest is never silent. There's always birds, insects, wind through the canopy. But this forest had none of that. It felt like we'd stepped into a photograph, everything frozen except us. Only our footsteps and breathing echoed back from the trees. Miller walked point, stopping every 20 yards to listen, his body language screaming something was wrong. Davidson kept touching his neck, that unconscious gesture when you feel watched. Chen had gone completely professional, which meant he was more worried than he showed. Kowalski, who never shut up, hadn't said a word. Half a mile in, the smell hit me. It reminded me of a zoo, that thick animal smell of big predators, but mixed with something else. Wet dog, spoiled meat. And underneath, something that smelled almost like human sweat, but wrong, aged and concentrated and feral. You guys smell that? Chen said quietly. Yeah. Something big has been through here recently, I said. Davidson stopped suddenly, fist raised. We dropped into defensive positions. He pointed at the ground ahead. Tracks. But not like any I'd seen before, and I've tracked everything. These prints were pressed deep, something heavy, roughly the size of a man's hand, but the shape was wrong. What the fuck is that? Miller whispered. 4 distinct digit marks ending in claw points, but the overall shape was between a wolf's paw and a human hand. And the spacing made no sense, approximately 3 feet apart, too long for any quadruped, but the stride varied wildly, as if whatever made them alternated between different gaits. Davidson ran his fingers along the print. Made recently. Past. Few hours. Boss, I don't know what made these. The spacing is wrong for bears, wrong for wolves, wrong for anything I've tracked. And look, he pointed to details. That's not a paw, too articulated. Those look almost like fingers. We spread out, found tracks everywhere, crisscrossing in patterns suggesting the creature knew these woods intimately. Some showed that weird half-paw, half-hand shape. Others were more wolf-like. Then prints that looked almost human but too large, with claw marks extending from where toenails would be. It's like whatever made these changes shape, Chen said, staring at prints that transitioned within. 10 feet. Animals don't change shape, Kowalski said, but his voice lacked conviction. We kept moving toward base camp location. I kept seeing signs something large had been here. Broken branches at various heights, disturbed earth, and everywhere that smell getting stronger. That mix of predator musk and something my brain kept trying to categorize as almost human, but not quite. At the designated camp area, Miller found something that made us all stop. On a large pine 8 feet up, 4 parallel gouges in bark, each 3 inches wide, running vertically for 2 feet. Deep cuts with sap still sticky. Wood torn, away in strips, ripped with immense force. Bear marking? Chen suggested unconvincingly. I touched the lowest gouge. Bears mark trees, but not like this. Too high. A grizzly might reach 7 feet, maybe 8 stretched, and the spacing is wrong. Bear claws are closer together, they scratch, they don't gouge like this. So what are you saying? Kowalski asked. I looked at the marks, the height, the spacing. Something cold settled in my gut. I'm saying whatever made this is bigger than a bear, stronger than a bear, and has claws that can tear through pine bark like tissue paper. We set up camp in silence, everyone moving with efficiency that comes from training but also from fear. We established perimeter, set up tents, organized equipment, established watch rotations, all by the book. But I could feel tension in every movement, see eyes flicking to the tree line, hands drifting to weapons. By the time we finished, light was fading. In these mountains, surrounded by tall trees, darkness comes early and fast. The temperature dropped quickly, and with it came that particular quality of wilderness night where you become acutely aware you're in something's territory. Davidson came up beside me. Boss, I've been thinking about those tracks, about the spacing and transitions between different types, and there's only one explanation that fits. Whatever made them can walk on 4 legs and on 2 legs. It can alternate between them. That's not normal animal behavior, that's not... He stopped himself, shaking his head. But I knew what he'd been about to say. There are things you don't give voice to, things you keep locked in the rational parts of your mind, because letting them out makes them too real. As darkness fell, we sat close to the fire. There's something primal about fire in deep wilderness. It means safety from things that live in the dark. That night, none of us cared that it was mostly psychological. We sat close to those flames and tried not to think about the silence. That silence should have been our first warning. We weren't prepared for what it meant, that every living thing in this forest had already learned what happened when you made noise in the Alpha's territory. I pulled watch from 200 to 0400, which meant I was awake when things started. At 0243 I heard the first sounds that weren't from our camp. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps moving through forest maybe 70 yards from our perimeter. Slow, methodical, massive. Each one landing with enough force I could hear dead branches snapping. Whatever walked out there was big and moving with purpose. I activated my throat mic. Miller, you awake? Yeah. Immediate response meant he'd been lying awake, uneasy. Movement. North side, maybe 80 yards out. Large animal, moving parallel to our position. I hear it. Too big for deer. Sounds like something walking on 2 legs, I finished. Yeah, like that. The footsteps continued perhaps a minute, then stopped. Complete silence. I strained to hear where the creature went, but nothing. It was as if whatever had been walking simply vanished. It stopped, Miller said. I don't like this. Neither did I. Predators don't walk past prey and stop to stand still. Predators passing through don't stop. But predators hunting do stop. They stop to observe, to wait, to plan. I kept vigil the rest of my shift, but didn't hear those footsteps again. When Chen relieved me at 0400, I told him what I'd heard. His expression tightened. I went to my tent but didn't sleep. I lay fully dressed, rifle within reach, listening, while my mind worked through scenarios I didn't want to consider. When dawn broke, Miller was already at the fire. Chen said it came back, around 05:15. Same thing. Walked past on the west side, then stopped. Just stood there maybe 5 minutes before moving off. Any idea what it was doing? Yeah, he said flatly. It was circling us. First north, then west, mapping our perimeter. Animals circle prey when deciding whether to attack. They probe for weaknesses, test reactions, learn patterns. But that requires intelligence most predators don't possess. Most operate on instinct, see prey, evaluate, attack, or move on. They don't spend hours slowly circling a position, methodically observing. Full perimeter survey, I said. Daylight. Look for tracks, signs of how close it got. We started at the north side, where I'd first heard footsteps. Davidson found evidence quickly. The tracks were clearer in daylight, and they showed the creature had been walking exclusively on 2 legs when it passed our camp. The stride length was immense, nearly 4 feet, suggesting something with incredibly long legs or moving with deliberate, exaggerated steps. Look at the depth, Davidson said, crouched beside a clear print. This weighs at least 3, maybe 400 pounds. But look at the articulation in the foot structure. That's not a paw, that's a foot. See where toes are defined separately? See how the heel is dug in, but the ball shows more pressure? This thing was walking heel to toe, just like a human walks, but proportions are all wrong. How wrong? Kowalski asked. The foot is about 16 inches long. Toes are elongated and end in claw points that dug into earth about 1 inch, and spacing between big toe and others is wider than it should be, almost like a thumb opposing fingers. He looked up. I don't know what the fuck this is. I've tracked everything from Arctic wolves to mountain gorillas, and I've never seen anything like this. We followed the track line to the west side, where Chen had reported hearing footsteps return. The tracks approached within maybe 40 yards of camp, close enough the creature would have seen us clearly. Then the tracks stopped at a large pine base, but they didn't start again on the other side. They stopped. Where did it go? Chen asked. Davidson examined the tree, running hands over bark, then looked up. Way up. Holy shit! It climbed. The tree was massive. Trunk easily 6 feet diameter, lowest branches 15 feet up, but we could see fresh scratches in bark, deep gouges running vertically the first 20 feet, then smaller marks where the creature transitioned to branches. It climbed that high, moved through trees, and then Davidson moved around to trace the path. Came down about 30 yards away, other side of our camp. Look, landing marks. Deep impressions where something heavy had dropped from above, landing in a crouch that created 2 deep handprints and 2 footprints clustered together. From there, tracks led away, from camp, transitioning from bipedal to quadrupedal about 10 yards out, the creature apparently dropping to all fours to move faster. It's using the trees, Miller said quietly. It can move through them like an ape or something. An ape that weighs 400 pounds and has claws that dig through pine bark, I added, and that chooses to walk on 2 legs when it wants to. We spent an hour following tracks further out. The pattern was deeply unsettling. The creature had circled our entire camp multiple times throughout the night, sometimes walking, sometimes climbing, sometimes moving on. All fours. It had approached from different angles, observing us from different positions, learning our layout with methodical precision. This wasn't random wandering, this wasn't curiosity. This was reconnaissance. It's planning something, Chen said, voicing what we all thought. Yeah, I agreed. It's deciding whether we're worth attacking. We returned to camp to find Miller examining something near the fire pit. More tracks, but smaller, more wolf-like, clustered in a circle around scattered ashes. The creature had come close, very close, while we slept. It had circled the fire multiple times, stopping frequently as if examining things. It was looking at our gear, Miller said, pointing to marks near stacked equipment. See these prints? It was standing here on 2 legs for a while. And look, he pointed to the ground near an equipment bag. It touched this. You can see claw marks where it hooked into fabric. The bag had 3 parallel tiers, each about 4 inches long, fabric pulled apart to reveal contents inside. The creature had opened our bag. It had examined our equipment. Then it had closed the bag again, not perfectly but deliberately, as if trying to leave things as it found them. That's not animal behavior, Davidson said, his voice tight with controlled fear. That's intelligence, that's problem-solving, that's... Yeah, I interrupted, not wanting him to finish. Pack up. We're moving to a more defensible position. From now on, double watches. Nobody is alone. Ever. Weapons ready at all times. As we broke down camp, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. Every shadow between trees felt like it might contain something massive and calculating. Every distant sound of branches moving could have been something large moving through the canopy. That smell was everywhere now. That musky, feral odor mixed with something that made my hindbrain scream warnings. We were in something's territory, something that didn't match any official classification, something that thought and planned and watched, something that had already decided it was the apex predator here. And we had just been downgraded to prey. The second day changed everything because we stopped pretending we were hunters and started accepting we were prey. That acceptance didn't come easy. Soldiers are trained to maintain operational initiative, to control the battlefield, to dictate terms. But everything we'd observed pointed to an uncomfortable truth. This creature was more intelligent than any animal we'd encountered, and it was studying us with the same analytical precision we were trying to use on it. We held a brief conference after finding the territorial marker. The mission parameters said 72 hours to locate the den and deploy tranquilizers. But we were halfway through that window and hadn't even gotten close to finding where this thing lived. What we had found was overwhelming evidence that the entire forest was its territory, and we were operating inside a hunting ground where we were massively outmatched. I think we need to call this in, Chen said tensely. Request clarification on rules of engagement. Maybe ask for additional support. Even if we get through, do you really think they'll tell us anything useful? I said. They sent us in here blind for a reason. Davidson had been quiet, examining notes and sketches of tracks. Now he looked up with an expression that made me think he'd come to a conclusion he didn't like. I've been thinking about the behavior patterns, the circling, the observation, the territorial marking. This isn't normal predator behavior. This is something else. What do you mean? Miller asked. Predators hunt for food or defend territory out of instinct. But this thing isn't trying to eat us. If it wanted that, it could have attacked last night when we were sleeping. And it's not defending territory by driving us away. It's keeping us here, watching us, learning about us. That's not instinct. That's curiosity. That's intelligence. The word hung in the air and nobody wanted to be first to acknowledge what it implied. Intelligence meant consciousness, meant awareness, meant the creature was thinking and planning and making decisions based on complex evaluation. And if that was true, we weren't dealing with a large predator. We were dealing with something that might be as smart as we were, but with physical capabilities that made it far more dangerous. We were in the middle of organizing equipment when Kowalski, on watch, suddenly hissed for attention. Movement, southeast, close, maybe 40 yards. We grabbed weapons and moved to positions. Through the trees I could see something large moving, staying in shadows, using thick trunks and undergrowth to remain mostly concealed. What I could see was disturbing, patches of dark fur, glimpses of muscular shoulders, once a brief view of what looked like a hand gripping a tree trunk as the creature peered around it. It's getting bolder, Miller whispered. That's closer than it's come during daylight. He was right. Until now, the creature had maintained distance during the day. This felt like escalation, like it had decided we were no longer dangerous enough to warrant caution, and that was terrifying. The creature moved laterally, paralleling our position, and I tracked it through my scope. Every few seconds I'd get a clearer view, a massive shoulder covered in dark, almost black fur, a forearm that looked too long and too thick with muscle. Once briefly the side of its head as it turned to look directly at our camp. The head was shaped wrong, too large, too forward set, with a pronounced muzzle that was somewhere between wolf and something else. Then it stopped moving. It stood behind a tree, perhaps 35 yards away, and through my scope I could see it was standing on two legs, one arm braced against the trunk, head tilted slightly as if listening, and I realized with a chill that it could probably hear everything we were saying. "It's listening," I said quietly into my mic. "Everyone stay calm, but assume it can hear us." For perhaps 2 minutes the creature remained in that position, absolutely motionless. It was close enough now that I could see details through the scope, the thickness of fur, the way muscles moved beneath the pelt when it shifted weight, the size of the hand gripping the tree. The hand was what got me. It wasn't a paw. The fingers were too long, too articulated, with opposable thumb placement that suggested dexterity. And then, slowly, deliberately, the creature leaned out from behind the tree, far enough that I could see its face. The scope was powerful enough that even at 35 yards I got a clear view, and what I saw made my hands tighten on the rifle with instinctive fear. The face was predominantly wolf-like, elongated muzzle, pronounced jaw, ears that stood upright. But the proportions were wrong. The skull was too large, the forehead too prominent, suggesting more brain capacity than any wolf should have. And the eyes. My God, the eyes. They were forward-facing like a predator's eyes should be, giving binocular vision necessary for hunting. But they weren't the simple, instinct-driven eyes of an animal. They were complex, expressive, and worst of all, they were looking at me with unmistakable recognition. The creature knew I was watching. It through the scope. It knew I was the leader. And it was making eye contact deliberately, holding my gaze through the lens with an intensity that communicated awareness and intelligence. The eyes were amber, almost gold, with dark pupils that contracted slightly as the angle of light changed. And in those eyes I saw something that shouldn't exist in any animal. I saw thought. I saw calculation. I saw a mind working behind them, evaluating me the same way I was evaluating it. "Boss," Miller whispered urgently. "What do you see?" I couldn't answer for a moment. I was locked in that gaze, and I felt like I was being measured, weighed, assessed. The creature tilted its head slightly, the gesture eerily human, as if curious about something. Then, very slowly, very deliberately, it pulled back behind the tree and vanished into the forest. I heard branches moving as it departed, the sounds of something large moving away at a moderate pace, not hurrying, not fleeing, just leaving because it had seen what it wanted to see. "It was looking at me," I finally said, my voice tight. Direct eye contact. It knew I was watching through the scope, and it wanted me to see it. It wanted me to know that it's aware, that it's intelligent. "Fuck," Kowalski breathed. "What are we dealing with here?" Davidson was shaking his head slowly, his expression troubled. "There are legends. Native American tribes in this region have stories about creatures that are part human, part beast. Creatures that can walk on 2 legs or 4, that have intelligence of humans but power of animals. Creatures that can't be killed by normal means." "Davidson," I started, but he cut me off. "I know how it sounds, but look at the evidence. Look at what we've seen. The tracks that change shape, the intelligence in its behavior, the way it alternates between bipedal and quadrupedal movement, the vocalizations, and now this, making eye contact, showing itself deliberately. That's not animal behavior." Miller's face had gone pale. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Davidson looked at each of us. "I'm saying maybe those legends aren't just legends. Maybe we're dealing with something that science hasn't categorized because science refuses to admit it exists." "A werewolf," Chen said flatly. "You're talking about a fucking werewolf." Nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed it, because as insane as it sounded, it fit the evidence better than any rational explanation. We'd all been thinking it, feeling it in our guts since we'd first seen those tracks. We just hadn't wanted to give it voice, hadn't wanted to cross that line from dealing with a dangerous mission into dealing with something supernatural. It doesn't matter what we call it, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. What matters is that it's intelligent, it's dangerous, and it's decided we're interesting enough to study, which means sooner or later, it's going to stop studying and start testing. We need to be ready. But even as I said it, I wondered what being ready actually meant when you were facing something that combined animal strength with human intelligence. What defense could possibly work against something like that? We were about to find out. The attack came during the afternoon of the second day against someone we'd sent outside the immediate perimeter. That was our first tactical mistake. We'd gotten complacent during daylight hours, assuming the creature was primarily nocturnal. We were catastrophically wrong. Kowalski had volunteered to scout northeast toward a rocky outcropping 300 yards from base camp. He'd checked in at 10 minutes, reported halfway there, everything clear. He'd checked in again at 20 minutes, said he'd reached the outcropping and was setting up the sensor. That was the last normal communication. At 23 minutes, his radio clicked on, but there was no voice, just wind and branches moving. Then we heard something that made us all freeze, a low, rumbling growl, close enough to Kowalski's mic that it must have been within a few feet of him. Then Kowalski's voice, sharp and scared. "Contact! It's right here, it's—" The transmission cut off with a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. Kowalski screaming, and underneath that scream, a roar so loud it distorted the audio, and beneath that, sounds of impact, of something hitting flesh and bone with terrible force. "Kowalski, report!" I shouted into my radio. "Kowalski!" Nothing. Dead air. "Everyone move!" I barked. "Davidson, Chen, you're with me. Miller, hold the camp. We're going after him." We moved fast, weapons ready, tactical spacing maintained even in our urgency. The route Kowalski had taken was visible. Broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, his boot prints clear in soft earth. We covered the distance in under 4 minutes, and as we got closer, we started seeing things that made our pace slow despite our desperation to reach him. Blood, splattered on tree trunks, soaked into the ground. More blood than I'd ever seen from a single source, and it was fresh, still bright red, still spreading. The trail of blood led off Kowalski's path, heading deeper into the forest, and alongside the blood were drag marks, something heavy being pulled through the underbrush, and the tracks that accompanied those drag marks were the creature's prints, showing all 4 limbs pressed deep into earth, moving fast despite carrying substantial weight. "Jesus Christ," Chen breathed, staring at the blood trail. We followed it for another 30 yards, and that's where we found what was left of Kowalski. I'm not going to describe it in detail because some images don't need to be preserved in words, but what I will say is that the attack had been fast, brutal, and conducted with a level of anatomical knowledge that shouldn't exist in any animal. The creature had known exactly where to strike to kill quickly, had known exactly how to disable and incapacitate, and then it had fed. Not extensively, this wasn't about hunger, this was about making a point. The creature had killed Kowalski, dragged him off the path, taken enough to demonstrate dominance and capability, and then left the body where we would find it. This was a message as clear as the territorial marker. This is my territory. You are in my hunting ground, and I can kill you whenever I choose. Davidson was checking the surrounding area, his face pale, but his training keeping him functional. The tracks lead away northeast. It's moving deeper into its territory. "It left the body here for us to find," I said quietly. "But it took his weapon, his radio, and his pack. Look at the way the equipment was torn away. Those are claw marks in the straps. It wanted us to know it could take whatever it wanted from us." I felt cold fury rising alongside the fear. The creature had killed one of my men, had ambushed him during broad daylight while we thought we were being cautious, had killed him so fast that Kowalski, a combat veteran with multiple tours, hadn't even had time to fire his weapon. And now it was making sure we understood that our technology, our training, our weapons meant nothing against it. "We need to move the body," I said quietly. "Get him back to camp, we'll call for extraction and get the hell out of here." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. The creature had let us find Kowalski, had left clear tracks leading away, had made sure we understood it had retreated. But predators don't kill once and disappear. Predators that taste blood come back for more. And intelligent predators know that the best way to break a group's cohesion is to kill them one at a time, making sure the survivors are traumatized and terrified before moving on to the next target. We got Kowalski's body back to camp, and it took all three of us. Miller saw us coming, and his face went grey. Chen immediately got on the SATCOM, trying to raise command for emergency extraction, but the signal was garbage, cutting in and out, giving us nothing but static and occasional fragments of automated responses. "We're on our own," Chen finally said, setting down the radio. "I can't get through." "Keep trying," I ordered. "Use the emergency beacon codes. Someone will eventually respond." But I didn't believe it. This felt like the kind of operation where emergency extraction wasn't really an option, where the people who sent us in had already written us off as acceptable losses. They'd sent us after something they called the Alpha, without telling us what it was, and now we knew why. Because if they'd told us we were hunting something that could think and plan and kill with this kind of precision, we never would have accepted the mission. The rest of that day passed in tense silence. We pulled in our perimeter, abandoned any pretense of continuing the mission, and focused entirely on survival. Chen kept working the radio, sending out distress calls that vanished into static. Miller and I reinforced our defensive position, creating firing lanes with clear sight lines, setting up every motion sensor and alarm we had. Davidson documented everything, the tracks, the attack site, the nature of Kowalski's injuries, creating a record in case any of us survived to report it. As sunset approached, we gathered around the fire to discuss options. The mood was grim and the fear was palpable, but we were still soldiers, still trained to function under stress. "I think it's going to attack again tonight," Davidson said. "It's established dominance. It's killed one of us to prove it can. Now it's going to come for the rest of us." "So we fight," Miller said flatly. "We set up overlapping fields of fire. We use the lights to minimize its cover, and we kill it when it comes." "If we can kill it," Chen added. "We still don't know what we're dealing with. Kowalski was armed, trained, alert, and it killed him in seconds." "Then what do you suggest?" Miller snapped. "We just sit here and wait to die?" "I'm suggesting we accept that we might not survive this," Chen said quietly. "And that if we don't, someone needs to know what happened here, what we found, what killed us." He pulled out a small digital recorder. "I'm going to record everything we know, everything we've seen, and I'm going to leave it somewhere secure, somewhere that might be found if anyone ever comes looking, because whatever that thing is out there, people need to know it exists." Nobody argued. We each took turns recording our observations, our theories, our documentation of the evidence. It felt like recording last words, which I suppose it was. When it was my turn, I looked into the recorder and said what I'd been thinking since we found those first tracks. This thing isn't an animal. It's not human. It's something in between, something that combines the worst aspects of both. It thinks like we think, but it has none of our limitations. And if you're hearing this recording, it means we failed to stop it, which means it's still out there, still hunting, still waiting for the next group of people stupid enough to enter its territory. As I handed the recorder back to Chen, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Somewhere in the distance, maybe half a mile out, a howl rose up into the evening air. But it wasn't the howl of a normal wolf. It was too deep, too resonant, and it had something almost vocal in it, almost like a voice screaming through the shape of a howl. And then, from a different direction, another howl answered it. "That was different," Davidson said, his voice tight. "That second howl came from the west. The first one was northeast." "There can't be two of them," Miller said, but his voice betrayed his doubt. "Maybe there is," I said quietly. "Maybe we've been assuming it was alone because we've only seen evidence of one at a time. But what if this whole forest is a territory shared by multiple creatures? What if we've been in the middle of a pack's hunting ground?" The implications were too terrible to fully process. One of these creatures was almost impossible to deal with. Multiple creatures coordinating and hunting as a pack, using intelligence and animal capabilities together. That was a nightmare scenario that meant we had almost no chance of survival. The howls continued for the next 20 minutes, coming from different directions, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. It sounded like the creatures were communicating, coordinating, preparing for something. and we stood in the middle of our camp, weapons ready, lights on, waiting for the dark to come and the real horror to begin. Kowalski's body lay wrapped in a tarp near the fire, and looking at it, I realized that by this time tomorrow we might all be in the same condition. The creature had shown us what it was capable of. Now it was going to show us that it could do it again and again until none of us were left. The night was coming, and with it the Alpha was returning to finish what it had started. Full darkness came at 1945 hours, and with it came certainty that we were about to face something we had no real hope of surviving. The howls had stopped maybe 30 minutes before sunset, which was somehow worse than hearing them. At least when the creatures were vocalizing, we had some idea where they were. The silence that followed felt like the moment before an avalanche, that terrible suspended instant, when you know disaster is coming but you can't see it yet. We'd arranged ourselves in a defensive circle around the fire, each of us covering a quadrant, night vision goggles and thermal scopes active, weapons loaded and safeties off. Motion sensors we'd placed at the perimeter fed into a central display that Chen monitored, and we'd rigged up battery-powered spotlights that could be triggered remotely. It was the best defensive setup we could manage, but it felt pathetically inadequate. "Movement," Chen said quietly. "Northeast sensor. Something big. Moving slowly." We all shifted slightly to orient on that direction, weapons ready. Through my thermal scope I could see the heat signature approaching, maybe 80 yards out, moving between trees with deliberate care. It was huge, the size confirming it was one of the creatures, but it was moving with unusual caution, as if it knew we were watching and was testing our responses. "I've got it," Miller confirmed. "Should I illuminate?" "Wait," I said. "Let's see what it does." The creature continued its slow approach, closing to 60 yards, then 50. It was walking upright. I could tell from the gait pattern visible in the thermal image, moving with a steady, almost casual pace that suggested confidence rather than caution. It stopped behind a large tree, and for a long moment there was no movement. Then, in a gesture that seemed deliberately provocative, it stepped out into clear view and stood there, fully exposed. Through the thermal scope I could see it clearly, standing easily 7.5 feet tall, broad shoulders, long arms, massive torso. The head tilted back, and even through the scope I could see the moment it opened its jaws, because the thermal signature showed the cooler air of its mouth contrasting with the hot breath that billowed out. Then it howled, and the sound hit us like a physical force. It was louder than I'd thought possible, echoing through the forest, making my chest vibrate with the subsonic components. But more than the volume, it was the quality of the sound that terrified me, because woven into that howl, I swear I could hear something like words, like the creature was trying to shape the howl into communication, into a message we were supposed to understand. "Light it up," I ordered. Miller triggered the spotlight, and suddenly the creature was illuminated in harsh white light. For the first time, we saw it fully, not through scopes or in glimpses, but standing in bright light, undeniable and impossible. It was covered in thick, dark fur that was almost black, with patches of grey around the muzzle and chest. The body structure was wrong for any known animal, too upright, too balanced on two legs, with shoulders that were too broad and arms that hung too long. The legs were massively muscled, digitigrade like a wolf's but capable of supporting full bipedal posture. And the head was the worst part, wolf-like in overall shape, with a pronounced muzzle and pointed ears, but the skull was too large, the forehead too prominent, and the eyes that looked back at us in the spotlight were filled with unmistakable intelligence and something that looked disturbingly like amusement. The creature didn't flee from the light. It didn't crouch or show aggression. It just stood there letting us look at it, as if it wanted us to see clearly what we were dealing with. Then, very deliberately, it raised one arm, and I could see the long fingers tipped with black claws, the thumb opposing the fingers in clear primate fashion, and made a gesture that looked almost like a wave. Is it saying hello?" Chen stammered. Before anyone could answer, the creature dropped to all fours and launched itself toward us with explosive speed. It covered 20 yards in what couldn't have been more than 2 seconds, moving with the kind of acceleration that nothing that large should be capable of. We opened fire, automatic weapons tearing through the night, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. I saw rounds hit, saw the creature's shoulder jerk as bullets impacted, saw fur and flesh tear, but it didn't slow down, didn't stop, didn't even seem particularly bothered. It was 15 yards away, then 10, and I could see its face clearly now in the light and muzzle flashes, could see the lips pulled back from teeth designed to tear flesh, could see those two intelligent eyes locked onto us with predatory focus. Then, impossibly, it stopped. Just stopped dead, 10 yards from our perimeter, skidding slightly in the pine needles. It stood there for 1 heartbeat, 2, while we kept firing, rounds hitting its chest and shoulders and legs, and then it turned and bounded away into the darkness with the same impossible speed it had approached with. We stopped shooting, the sudden silence after the gunfire, almost as shocking as the attack itself. My ears were ringing, my hands were shaking from adrenaline, and my mind was trying to process what I'd just seen. "We hit it," Miller said, his voice tight. "I saw the impacts. We hit it multiple times." "And it didn't care," Davidson added. "It took the hits and just ran off." "Why?" Chen asked. "Why charge us and then retreat? If it wanted to attack, it could have. We barely slowed it down." I knew why, and the knowing made everything so much worse. It was testing us. It wanted to see how we'd react, what our weapons could do, how we'd coordinate under attack. It was gathering information. "You're saying it took bullets on purpose?" Miller's voice was incredulous. "I'm saying it's smart enough to know that understanding our capabilities is worth the cost of a few wounds, and based on how fast it moved after being hit." I gestured toward where the creature had been standing. There was blood on the ground, dark spatters visible in the spotlight beam, but not as much as there should have been for the number of hits we'd made. "Based on that, I'm guessing, the wounds aren't going to slow it down for long." "Northeast sensor again," Chen called out, "but also southwest and northwest, multiple contacts." The display he was watching showed 3 distinct motion triggers, and as I watched, they began to move in a coordinated pattern. The creatures were circling us, maintaining roughly the same distance, moving in a synchronized way that was clearly coordinated. And the implication was clear. We'd been right about there being more than one. We were surrounded by multiple creatures, and they were working together. "They're herding us," Davidson said quietly. "Watch the pattern. They're staying at the edge of our sensor range, moving in a way that keeps us focused on them, keeps us spinning to track them. But what we're not watching is the gaps," I finished, "the spaces between the sensors, the approach paths we think are covered but aren't." As if responding to my words, I heard something directly behind us, from the direction of the rock face we'd chosen specifically because nothing could approach from that angle. I spun around, bringing my weapon up, and saw a massive shape moving along the top of the rock face 20 feet above ground, its eyes reflecting the firelight with that distinctive amber glow. "Above us!" I shouted. "They're coming from above!" The creature on the rock face launched itself downward, dropping into our camp with the controlled fall of something that knew exactly what it was doing. It landed maybe 15 feet from the fire, absorbing the impact with bent legs, and then immediately springing forward toward Chen, who was closest to that side of the perimeter. Chen fired, the muzzle flash illuminating the creature's face for a strobe-like instant, and I saw its lips curl back in what I swear was a smile. Then it swatted Chen's rifle aside with one long arm, the weapon flying from his hands as if it weighed nothing, and grabbed him by the tactical vest with the other hand. The strength was incredible. The creature lifted Chen off his feet with one arm, holding him up like he weighed nothing, and for one terrible moment it just looked at him, tilting its head as if curious about what it was holding. Chen was screaming, trying to draw his sidearm, and the creature seemed almost patient, waiting to see what he would do. Then we all opened fire. At once, rounds hitting the creature from 3 different angles. It dropped Chen immediately, letting him fall to the ground, and retreated with that same impossible speed, bounding away into the darkness beyond our lights. Chen scrambled backward, gasping, and I could see claw marks in his vest where the creature had gripped him, the fabric torn, but the skin beneath miraculously intact. "Sound off," I barked. "Everyone status." "I'm okay," Chen gasped. It had me, and it just let go." "It's playing with us," Davidson said, and his voice had the kind of flatness that comes from accepting something terrible. "This isn't an attack, this is entertainment, they're toying with us." He was right, and recognizing that made everything so much worse, because it meant the creatures weren't hunting us out of hunger or territorial defense. They were doing this because they enjoyed it, because they found our fear and our desperation amusing, because they had nothing to fear from us and all the time in the world to break us down. The motion sensors showed the contacts retreating, pulling back to their previous distance, and then the circling resumed. Around and around our position, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always moving, always there, always reminding us that we were surrounded and outmatched. "We can't keep this up all night," Miller said quietly. "We're burning through ammo. Our nerves are shredded, and they haven't even seriously attacked yet. When they decide to stop playing and actually hit us for real, we're done." "Then we change the paradigm," I said, making a decision that felt insane, but might be our only chance. "We're not going to sit here and wait for them to take us apart. We're going to move now. We head for the extraction point. We move fast, we stick together, and we make them chase us instead of letting them control this fight." "That's suicide," Chen said. "They know this forest better than we do. They can move faster than we can. We'll never make it." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But staying here is definitely death. At least if we move, we're doing something. We're forcing them to adapt instead of letting them dictate terms." I could see them processing it, weighing certain death against probable death, and I saw the moment they accepted it. Because doing something, even something desperate, is better than sitting still and waiting to be slaughtered. "We move in 5 minutes," I said. "Take only what you can carry and run with. Weapons, ammo, water, everything else gets left behind. Davidson, you're on point. Chen, middle. Miller, rear guard. I'll float and reinforce wherever they hit us. And understand this, we're not trying to fight them. We're trying to survive long enough to get to the extraction point and call for pickup. Avoid engagement if possible. Run when you can. And if they separate us—" I didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. We moved fast, gathering essential gear, abandoning everything else. As I worked, I could see the motion sensors still showing those contacts circling, and I wondered if the creatures knew what we were planning. I wondered if they were smart enough to anticipate our move and position themselves accordingly. I was about to find out. "Move out," I ordered. We left the fire burning, left the lights on, and plunged into the darkness of the forest, with death following behind us and ahead of us and all around us. And the only thing we had left was the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, we could move, fast enough to stay alive until dawn. We'd covered maybe 400 yards when they hit us properly for the first time, and the attack came from above and ahead, dropping down from the trees like they'd been lying in wait specifically on our escape route. Because of course they had. They'd known we would run, they'd anticipated it, and they'd positioned themselves perfectly to intercept. The first indication was Davidson's shout of warning, cut off midway as something massive dropped from the canopy directly onto him. I saw him go down in a tangle of fur and claws and, thrashing limbs, saw his rifle go flying, heard him screaming. Miller and I opened fire immediately, rounds tearing through the trees and hitting the creature that had Davidson pinned, but it moved with that same horrible speed, rolling aside and dragging Davidson with it into the underbrush. "Davidson!" I shouted, pushing forward, but before I could reach him, another creature came at us from the left, moving on all fours at a gallop that closed distance so fast it was almost teleportation. Chen fired, his rounds hitting center mass, and the creature stumbled but didn't stop, crashing into Chen and sending him flying backward into a tree trunk with sickening force. Miller was screaming something, firing controlled bursts at shadows moving through the trees, and I was caught in the middle trying to cover both directions at once and knowing with terrible certainty that we were about to be torn apart. This was it. This was how it ended. Separated, surrounded, outmatched by creatures that were faster and stronger and smarter than we were. I heard Davidson scream again, the sound wet and choked, and I knew without seeing that he was being killed. I couldn't see Chen, couldn't tell if he was dead or unconscious or somehow still alive. Miller was backing toward me, firing at movement, his face streaked with sweat and his eyes wide with the kind of fear that breaks men. "Reynolds," he shouted. "We need to—" He never finished the sentence. A creature came at him from behind, moving upright, towering over him, and before he could turn it had grabbed him with both hands and lifted him off the ground. Miller tried to bring his weapon around, but the creature simply squeezed and I heard ribs crack like dry branches. Miller's scream turned into a gasp, and the creature threw him aside like discarded trash. I was alone, surrounded by shadows that were too fast to track, too many to fight. My ammunition was running low, my hands were shaking, and I knew with absolute certainty that in the next 30 seconds I was going to die just like my entire squad had died, torn apart by creatures that shouldn't exist, but did. I backed up against a large tree, trying to keep everything in front of me, weapon raised, finger on the trigger, ready to go down fighting. The shapes moving through the trees stopped, forming a loose circle around my position maybe 20 yards out. I could see them in glimpses through my night vision. Massive forms, sometimes upright, sometimes on all fours, eyes reflecting green in the NVG display. There were at least 4 of them, possibly more, and they were just standing there, watching, waiting. Then one of them stepped forward into a small clearing where moonlight filtered through the canopy, and for the first time I saw one of these creatures in clear, direct light, without the distortion of scopes or the panic of combat. It stood fully upright, and I could judge its height accurately now, almost 8 feet tall with shoulders probably 4 feet across. The body was massively muscled, covered in thick, dark fur that was almost black. The arms were long, the hands large with clearly defined fingers, tipped in claws that looked like they could tear through metal. The legs were digitigrade, bent like a wolf's, but supporting full bipedal posture with perfect balance. But it was the head that held my attention. The head was large, set forward on the shoulders with a pronounced muzzle full of teeth designed to rend flesh. The ears stood, upright, mobile and expressive. And the eyes, God, the eyes, looked at me with such obvious intelligence that I couldn't maintain the pretense that this was just an animal. The eyes were amber, almost golden, with dark pupils that contracted and dilated as the creature studied me. They were forward-facing, predatory, but they held an expression that was undeniably conscious, aware, evaluative. This thing was looking at me the way a human looks at another human, measuring and judging and deciding. And in those eyes I saw recognition of what I was, understanding of my fear, and something that looked disturbingly like curiosity mixed with contempt. The creature tilted its head slightly, the gesture eerily human, and I realized it was waiting for something, waiting to see what I would do, whether I would fire, whether I would run, whether I would stand my ground or collapse in terror. It was giving me options, letting me choose my response, and that level of psychological manipulation was more terrifying than any physical threat could have been. My radio crackled, and Chen's voice came through, weak and pained. "Boss, I'm alive. Can't move, but They're not finishing it. Why aren't they?" The creature's ears swiveled toward my radio, clearly hearing the transmission, and then its gaze shifted back to me. And then it did something that made every rational thought I'd ever had about animal behavior shatter into fragments. It smiled. Not the instinctive baring of teeth that animals do when aggressive. An actual smile. The lips curled up at the corners, the eyes narrowed slightly, and the entire expression communicated amusement and satisfaction. "Jesus Christ," I breathed. "You understand me, don't you? You understand what we're saying." The creature's smile widened slightly. Then it did something even more impossible. It vocalized. Not a growl or a howl, but a sound that started deep in its chest and came out shaped almost like a word. "Yes!" The sibilance was drawn out, the pronunciation was rough and guttural, but there was no mistaking what I'd heard. This creature had just spoken English. Not perfectly, not clearly, but enough to communicate understanding. Enough to answer my question. Enough to confirm that everything we'd feared about intelligence and awareness was absolutely true. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" The creature tilted its head the other way, as if considering the question. Then it made another sound, this one more complex, with multiple syllables that I couldn't quite pass, but that definitely had structure, had language, had meaning. It was trying to answer, but whatever vocal apparatus it had wasn't designed for human speech. The attempt was there, the intelligence was there, but the execution was limited. I heard movement behind me and spun, bringing my weapon around, but it was Miller, crawling toward my position, his vest torn and blood staining his shirt, but somehow still alive. He collapsed at my feet, gasping, and I saw that while he'd been thrown hard, enough to break ribs, he hadn't been killed. None of us had been killed. Chen was alive, Miller was alive. Even Davidson, who I'd been sure was dead, I could hear moaning somewhere off in the underbrush. They hadn't killed us. They'd hurt us, terrorized us, demonstrated total dominance. But they hadn't actually finished us. And that meant this wasn't about food or territory or instinctive aggression. This was about something else. "You're hunting us," I said quietly, looking back at the creature in the clearing. "But not to kill. For sport?" The creature's expression changed, becoming harder to read, and it made another vocalization, shorter this time, that sounded almost negative. Not agreement, but not quite disagreement either. Something more complex than a simple yes or no could convey. Then it gestured with one long arm, the movement encompassing the forest around us, and made another sound that was definitely shaped like words I couldn't understand. But the meaning was somehow clear in context. "This is our territory. You are intruders, and we will deal with you as we see fit." Before I could say anything more, the creature stepped back into shadow, and the shapes around the perimeter began to withdraw. Within seconds, they'd vanished into the forest, moving with such silence that if I hadn't seen them leave, I wouldn't have known they were gone. The forest returned to its oppressive silence, and I was left standing with my weapon raised, my hands shaking, and my mind trying to process what had just happened. "Boss," Miller gasped from the ground. What was that?" "That," I said quietly, "was them showing us mercy. Or at least what passes for mercy in their world. They could have killed us all, but they didn't. They left us alive. Why?" That was the question. Why leave us alive after demonstrating total superiority? Why communicate? Why respond to questions? Why show restraint when they had every advantage? And the only answer I could come up with made me feel sick, because they wanted us to know. They wanted us to understand what we'd been sent to hunt. They wanted us to carry that knowledge back, assuming any of us survived. I helped Miller to his feet, and we moved carefully to check on Chen and Davidson. Chen was battered but conscious. His body armor had saved him from the worst. Davidson was in worse shape, claw marks across his chest and shoulders, bleeding heavily but somehow still breathing. The creature that had taken him down could have killed him easily, had chosen not to. "We need to move," I said, helping Davidson to his feet, "before they change their minds." We stumbled through the forest, moving as quickly as Davidson's injuries would allow, expecting at any moment for the creatures to return. But they didn't. We made it another mile, then 2, and finally reached a small clearing with a stream where we could stop and try to treat Davidson's wounds. As Chen worked on field dressing the claw marks, I stared into the darkness surrounding us and tried to understand what we were dealing with. Creatures that could think and plan and communicate. Creatures that hunted humans not out of hunger, but out of something more complex. Territorial assertion, perhaps, or demonstration of dominance, or even something like contempt for what we represented. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought formed that I didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't ignore. These creatures weren't just intelligent, they were people. Different people, monstrous people, terrifying people. But people nonetheless. People who had been living in these mountains long before we arrived, who had their own society and rules and purposes. People we'd been sent to capture like animals, and who had responded to that insult by teaching us exactly how outmatched we were. The mission was over. We weren't capturing anything. We were just trying to survive. Dawn came slowly, grey light filtering through the canopy, and with it came a fragile sense of hope. We'd made it through the night. Davidson was still alive, though barely. Chen had managed to stop most of the bleeding, but infection was a real concern now. The claw wounds were deep, and whatever bacteria lived on those creatures' claws was probably already working its way into Davidson's system. "How far to extraction?" Miller asked, his voice tight with pain from his broken ribs. I checked the GPS. 3 miles, maybe 3.5. Can he make it? Chen asked, looking at Davidson, who was pale and sweating despite the morning chill. He has to, I said simply. Because the alternative was leaving him, and I wasn't ready to make that call yet. We started moving as soon as there was enough light to see clearly. Davidson was barely conscious, Chen and Miller taking turns supporting him while I scouted ahead and guarded our rear. Every shadow looked like it might contain something massive and calculating. Every distant sound of branches moving could have been the creatures following us. But the forest felt different now, less oppressive, as if the creatures had withdrawn to give us space. I knew better than to think we were safe. They were still out there, still watching, still making decisions about what to do with us. We were alive only because they permitted it. We were maybe 2 miles from the extraction point when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this forest, that didn't fit the nightmare we'd been living. The sound of a helicopter, distant but getting closer. I grabbed my radio, switched to the emergency frequency. Ground team, this is Extraction 6. We have your beacon. Be advised, we are inbound to your location. ETA 12 minutes. Prepare for emergency pickup. Extraction 6, this is Ground Team Leader, I said into the radio, my voice shaking with sudden hope. Be advised, we are under pursuit by hostile forces. Multiple combatants extremely dangerous. Approach with extreme caution. Copy that, Ground Team. We're coming in hot. Hold your position. 12 minutes. We just had to survive 12 more minutes. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Howls. Multiple howls, coming from different directions, converging on our position. The creatures had heard the helicopter too. They knew what it meant. They knew their prey was about to escape. They're coming, Davidson whispered, barely conscious. They're not going to let us leave. He was right, I could feel it. The creatures had been content to toy with us, to demonstrate dominance, but extraction meant we'd escape their territory. We'd survive to tell what we'd seen. We'd bring others back here. They couldn't allow that. Defensive position, I ordered. Back to back, Davidson in the middle. The creatures emerged from the forest then, not hiding anymore, not staying in shadows. They moved into clear view, and for the first time I could see them all together. There were 5 of them, massive and powerful, each one moving with the confidence of an apex predator, and standing in the center, the largest one I'd confronted before, the one that had spoken. It stood fully upright, and in the morning light I could see it clearly. Almost 8 feet tall, shoulders 4 feet across, arms that hung to knee level, ending in hands with opposable thumbs and claws like knives. The head was wolf-like, but the skull was too large, the forehead too prominent. And those eyes, those terrible intelligent eyes, looked at us with something that might have been respect mixed with contempt. It opened its mouth, and I saw down its throat as it prepared to vocalize. The sound that came out started as a roar but ended with syllables, with words, with something that sounded like, "You go, now." It was giving us permission to leave, or perhaps a command. Either way, it was communication, clear and unmistakable. The creature was telling us that the game was over, that we'd been tested and found wanting, and now we were being dismissed like children who'd wandered where they shouldn't. The helicopter sound was much closer now, maybe 2 minutes out. The creature turned its head toward the sound, then back to us. Then it did something I'll never forget. It raised one hand to its head in what looked like a mocking salute, turned and walked back into the forest. The others followed, moving on 4 legs now, bounding away with impossible speed and grace. They were gone. Just like that. After everything they'd done to us, after killing Kowalski and terrorizing us for 2 days, they simply left because the helicopter was coming, because they'd made their point, because we weren't worth killing anymore. The helicopter crested the trees moments later, a military Black Hawk with door gunners on both sides. It settled into a hover above the clearing, and we were being pulled up on rescue cables, and then we were inside, and the forest was falling away below us, and I was looking down at that endless green expanse of trees, knowing that somewhere down there, hidden in the depths of that wilderness, the creatures that had hunted us were watching and waiting for the next fools stupid enough to enter their territory. The crew chief was asking questions, but I couldn't hear him over the rotor noise. Davidson was being tended to by a medic. Miller was strapped into a seat holding his ribs. Chen was staring out the window with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. And I was thinking about those eyes, those terrible, intelligent, amused eyes that had looked at me and seen not a threat, not worthy prey, but something beneath contempt, something to be toyed with and then dismissed. We landed at a military facility I didn't recognize. Men in suits were waiting, men with the kind of authority that comes from operating entirely outside official channels. They separated us immediately, took our weapons and equipment, and started the process of debriefing that I knew would end with everything being buried. "What happened out there?" the man interviewing me asked, his voice neutral, his expression giving nothing away. I looked at him for a long moment. "You already know," I said quietly. "You knew before you sent us in. You knew what was out there. You sent us to see what they'd do, to test them, to see if they'd kill us or just scare us off." He didn't deny it, didn't confirm it, just looked at me with those dead bureaucrat eyes and waited. "They're werewolves," I said, finally giving voice to the word we'd all been avoiding. Real, actual werewolves. Intelligent, organized, powerful. They have their own territory, their own rules, their own society. And they're not afraid of us, they're contemptuous of us. The man made a note. "The official report will indicate bear attack, equipment failure, operational errors, 1 KIA, 3 wounded, mission scrubbed due to unforeseen circumstances." "Of course it will," I said bitterly. "Sergeant Reynolds, there are things in this world that the public isn't prepared to know about. Things that would cause panic, chaos, societal breakdown, if they became common knowledge. What you encountered in those mountains is one of those things. They've lived there for longer than recorded history. They've reached an accommodation with certain elements of government. As long as they stay in their territory and limit their impacts, we leave them alone. But sometimes we need to verify their capabilities, assess their threat level. That's what your mission was really about." "Kowalski died for a fucking field test," I said, my voice flat with rage. "Kowalski died serving his country," the man said without emotion. "His family will receive full benefits. You and the survivors will receive disability pensions, appropriate to your injuries and significant financial compensation for your service. And you will never speak of what happened in those mountains to anyone. Ever." I knew I didn't have a choice. Knew that if I tried to talk I'd be discredited, possibly institutionalized, possibly disappeared. Knew that men like this didn't make threats. They simply informed you of reality. "The Alpha is still out there," I said quietly, "waiting. And one day someone's going to push too far into their territory, and those creatures are going to stop showing restraint. And when that happens, if that happens, we'll deal with it then," the man said. "Are we clear, Sergeant?" "Crystal," I said. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the helicopter came, before the extraction, there was one more moment that I need to tell you about. One more encounter that defines everything that came after. We were holding position, waiting for the helicopter, when the largest creature, the Alpha, stepped forward again. The others had retreated, but it stayed watching us. And then it did something that changed everything. It reached into the forest undergrowth and pulled something out. Kowalski's dog tags. The chain was broken, the metal plate stained with blood, but unmistakably his. The creature held them up dangling from one clawed finger and looked directly at me. Then it tossed them to me. I caught them reflexively, the metal cold against my palm, and looked up at the creature in confusion and horror. It made that sound again, that almost word, shaped with difficulty through its wolf-like muzzle. Remember. That's what it wanted. That's why it had let us live. Not mercy, not sport. It wanted us to remember. Wanted us to know that we'd been in the presence of something that should not exist but did. Wanted us to understand that human dominance over nature was an illusion, that there were still things in the world that were stronger, faster, smarter than us, in our natural state. Wanted us to spread that fear, that knowledge, that terrible understanding that we were not as alone on this planet as we like to think. The creature held my gaze for one more moment, and in those amber eyes I saw something that might have been satisfaction. Then it turned and vanished into the forest with liquid grace, and seconds later the helicopter arrived, and we were lifted out of that nightmare, but we never really left it. Because I still have Kowalski's dog tags, I carry them every day, wear them around my neck next to my own. And every time I feel them against my skin, I remember. I remember those eyes. I remember that smile. I remember the sound of something that shouldn't exist, saying a word it shouldn't be able to say. Remember. And I do. God help me. I do. I dream about it, you know. Not every night, but often enough. I dream that I'm running through the forest again, but this time I'm alone. And the creature is right behind me, its breath hot on my neck, its footsteps matching mine in perfect synchronization. And in the dream, I know that if I stop running, if I slow down even for a second, it will be on me. Those jaws will close around my throat, and I'll die knowing that I was never really the hunter. I was always the prey. But here's the thing that makes the dreams worse than the reality. In the dreams, I eventually stop running. I turn around to face it, to finally confront the thing that's been chasing me. And when I do, the creature stops too. It stands there on two legs, towering over me, and it takes off its face like a mask. And underneath is something worse than a wolf, worse than a human. It's both and neither. It's wrong in ways that make my brain hurt to process. And it's smiling that terrible smile that says it's been waiting for me to turn around, waiting for me to understand that the chase was never about catching me. It was about making me run, about making me afraid, about breaking something fundamental in my psyche that will never heal. I wake up from those dreams, and I check the locks on my doors and windows, and I know intellectually that I'm thousands of miles from those mountains, that the creatures have no reason to come looking for me, that I'm safe, but I don't feel safe. I'll never feel safe again. Because I know now that safety is an illusion we tell ourselves to function, and that illusion was shattered the moment I looked into those amber eyes and saw intelligence looking back. The psychiatrist they assigned me says I need to process the trauma and reintegrate my experience into a coherent narrative framework. What a fucking joke. How do you process the fact that werewolves are real? How do you integrate that into your understanding of the world? How do you go to the grocery store and buy milk and make small talk about the weather when you know that there are things living in the wild places that could tear apart any human with casual ease and choose not to, only because we're not worth the effort? Miller died 6 months after we got back. Official cause was complications from his injuries, but I know better. He killed himself. Couldn't live with what he'd seen. Couldn't reconcile his understanding of the world with the reality we'd encountered. I went to his funeral, saw his family crying, heard the military honors and the folded flag presentation, and I wanted to scream at all of them that they didn't understand, that Miller had seen something that broke him, that he'd looked into the eyes of a monster and the monster had found him wanting. Chen disappeared, just dropped off the grid entirely. No one knows where he went, and I suspect that's exactly how he wants it. Maybe he's hiding in some remote place, trying to get as far from those mountains as possible. Maybe he's doing what I should do, running always. Running even though we both know you can't really run from what's in your head. Davidson recovered from his physical injuries, but last I heard he'd had a breakdown and was in a facility somewhere. Kept talking about the eyes and the hands and the voice. They have him on heavy medication now, trying to keep him calm, trying to make him forget. But you can't forget something like that. You can bury it, you can medicate it, you can try to rationalize it away, but it's always there, lurking in the shadows of your mind, waiting for a quiet moment to remind you that you're not safe, you've never been safe, and the world is so much stranger and more terrifying than you ever imagined. So that's my story. That's what happened in the Bitterroot Mountains in September 3 years ago. The official record says it was a failed tracking mission, equipment malfunction, bear attack, 1 KIA, mission scrubbed. The official record is a lie. The truth is that there are werewolves living in those mountains, real ones, intelligent ones, organized ones, and they've been there for longer than we've been keeping records, living in the wild places, avoiding human contact, except when humans push too far into their territory. And when that happens, they respond not with the mindless aggression of animals, but with the calculated cruelty of intelligent beings who understand fear and know how to use it. The government knows, I'm sure of it now. They've known for years, maybe decades, maybe longer. They have some kind of arrangement, some kind of understanding. Stay out of their territory, and they'll stay out of ours. But sometimes they need to test the boundaries, need to verify capabilities, need to see if the creatures are still keeping to their side of the bargain. And that's what we were, a test, a probe. Expendable assets sent to poke the bear and see what happened. Kowalski paid the price for that test with his life. The rest of us paid with our sanity. And somewhere in those mountains, the Alpha is still there, still waiting, still watching for the next group of humans, stupid enough or unlucky enough to wander into its territory. And when they do, it will do what it did to us. It will hunt them, terrorize them, break them, and maybe, if it's feeling generous, it will let one or two survive to spread the fear. Because that's what it wants, not food, not territory. It wants us to know we're not alone. It wants us to understand that we're not the apex predators we think we are. It wants us to be afraid. And I am. God help me, I am. I still wake up in the middle of the night hearing that breathing, feeling those eyes on me. I still check shadows for movement that shouldn't be there. I still carry Kowalski's dog tags and remember the look on that creature's face when it tossed them to me. That expression that was almost pity, almost contempt, and entirely terrifying. The Alpha is still out there, still waiting, still watching. And we never really left that forest, not me, not Miller before he died, not Chen wherever he is, not Davidson in his facility. We're still there in the dark, in the cold, surrounded by things that should not exist but do, things that wear the shapes of beasts but think like men, things that hunt not out of hunger, but out of something far more disturbing. The simple desire to remind us that despite all our technology and weapons and civilization, we are still prey, and they are still the hunters. Thank you for staying with this terrifying journey into the darkness of the Bitterroot Mountains. If this story sent chills down your spine, if you found yourself checking over your shoulder, or if you couldn't stop reading until you reached the end, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another spine-tingling tale. Leave a like if this story kept you on the edge of your seat, and most importantly, drop a comment below telling us, what city or country are you watching from? Have you ever heard werewolf legends or stories of strange creatures in your region? Have you ever experienced something in the wilderness that you couldn't explain? Your stories and experiences fascinate us, and who knows, your comment might inspire our next terrifying narrative. Share this video with friends who love horror and supernatural tales. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, some things that walk in the dark forests are neither man nor beast, but something far, far worse. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. We'll see you in the next nightmare.